Have you heard about the Israeli warning shaking up the world? It's making headlines and causing quite a stir. People everywhere are on edge, wondering what this warning could mean for the future. So let's dive into this video today to know more about what's got everyone talking. Situated at the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, Israel is a small yet influential country in the Middle East. Despite its size, you can cross the entire country in 90 minutes, from the vibrant Mediterranean coast in the west to the tranquil Dead Sea in the east. Israel's borders reflect its geographical importance, surrounded by Lebanon to the north, Syria to the northeast, Jordan to the east, and Egypt to the southwest. In the Jewish belief, Israel is a special place God chooses for his people. It's like a spot where God's presence can be felt, and his plans can happen. The Jewish holy books, called the Tanakh, talk a lot about how important it is to pass down the land from one generation to another. They see owning the land as a gift from God, fulfilling a promise he made to Abraham, a very important person in Jewish history. The story of Israel goes back to Abraham, who made a deal with God. God promised Abraham's family would get the land of Canaan. Abraham's grandson, Jacob, had 12 sons who became the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. Because of a famine, they moved to Egypt, where they stayed for many years until Moses led them out. They wandered for 40 years before reaching Canaan. With Joshua's help, they fought and won the land, dividing it among the tribes. After the time of the judges, Israel wanted a king. Even though God warned them about the problems a king could bring, they still wanted one. Saul was the first king but didn't obey God, so he was rejected. Then David became king with the help of the prophet Samuel. David wanted to build a temple for God, but couldn't because of his past actions. Later, David's son Solomon became king and built the first temple in Jerusalem. It took about 7 years with help from King Hiram of Tyre. The temple was beautiful, made with valuable materials, and was meant to be a permanent place for worship. After Solomon's reign, once upon a time, everyone in Israel went to Solomon's temple, a big and fancy building made when King Solomon was in charge. But when Solomon died, his son Rehoboam became king. He wasn't very good at leading, and he made things tough for the people, and they didn't like it. A guy named Jeroboam led a rebellion in the northern tribes, splitting Israel into 2 parts. The first part, Israel, or the northern kingdom, had 10 tribes. They made Samaria their capital and started their religious way instead of following Jerusalem's rules. But they kind of forgot about worshiping God and started doing other stuff. The other part, Judah, had 2 tribes. They kept Jerusalem as their capital and followed the kings from David's family. Unlike the northern kingdom, Judah stayed true to God and continued to worship at Solomon's temple. But bad things happened. In 586 BCE, the Babylonians, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II, attacked Judah and wrecked Solomon's temple. The people of Judah had to go live in Babylon for almost 70 years. The Persians, led by Cyrus the Great, took over Babylon in 539 BCE. Cyrus allowed the Jews to return home and rebuild their temple. With a leader named Zerubbabel and help from the Persian king, they started building the second temple around 520 BCE. It wasn't as fancy as Solomon's temple, but it was still a place to worship for a long time. Fulfillment of biblical prophecies. Looking at times when things the Bible said would happen happened, we can see proof in history and past events. For example, Ezekiel 37:21-22 talks about God bringing the Israelites back to their land. This happened when Israel became a country again in 1948, like a nation being born in a single day, as Isaiah 66:8 says. Also, in Matthew 24:6-7, Jesus talks about wars and rumors of wars, saying they won't mean the end is near. Some people think the 2 world wars and other fights show this prophecy coming true. Similarly, Luke 21:11 talks about natural disasters like earthquakes and famines, which we've seen happening lately. These things make some Jewish people think the end is coming soon. But they're not just waiting around. They've set up the Sanhedrin to prepare for rebuilding the Temple Mount. Importance of the Third Temple. Even though you won't find the water ceremony mentioned in the written Torah, It's a big part of the traditions passed down by word of mouth from Moses. People see it as a happy holiday, even though it's not written down. Back in the old temple days, this ceremony lasted 15 hours, starting in the morning and going all night until the next morning when the temple services started again. During the Sukot celebrations, folks from all over would come together for worship. For the last 6 days of Sukot, there was a water ceremony in the morning service. Priests would fill a flask with spring water and head from the temple to the Shiloh spring at the base of Mount Moriah. Once they got back to the temple, they poured wine and water into special holes on the stone altar. The Shiloh Pool, also called Shalom in English and Silwan in Arabic, is super important biblically. Once the third temple is built, it will come back to life. People used to start their journey to Jerusalem for big religious festivals from this pool. After cleaning up in the pool, they'd head to the inner court of the Temple Mount to offer sacrifices. But why are people so eager to build the third temple when some believe Yeshua is in the real tabernacle in heaven? Well, it's not just about having a building. It's about giving God a special place to live among his people. The Bible says, "Let them construct a sanctuary for me that I may dwell among them." The prophet Ezekiel saw God's special presence leave the old temple, but he also saw that it would come back and stick around in a new permanent home in Jerusalem. A wise Jewish thinker named Rambam said the third temple isn't just redoing history. It symbolizes God always being with his people forever. So building the third temple isn't just about the past. It's about showing that God is always here with his people. Building the third temple. In their quest to rebuild the third temple, the Sanhedrin is putting in significant effort to prepare for the restoration of temple service in the future. It's not just about physical buildings and rituals, but a broader approach that honors the connection between the land and the divine. Rabbi Hillel Weiss, the spokesperson for the Sanhedrin, emphasizes that the temple is more than just about sacrifices and blood. It involves the deep connection between the land and the divine. To meet the agricultural needs of the third temple, the Sanhedrin is actively engaged in various projects. One notable initiative is the creation of the Biblical Temple Forest, a significant resource for temple service. This forest stands as a testament to the intricate connection between the land and the sacred rituals envisioned for the future temple. Understanding the importance of skilled individuals for temple service, the Sanhedrin has set up an institution to train people who will serve as priests in the third temple. Simultaneously, efforts are underway to manufacture a replica of the ancient temple materials. Some of these materials are already on display, showcasing the careful work invested in recreating essential elements for the functioning of the temple. The challenge of the red heifer and their arrival. The red heifer, a crucial element in biblical purification rituals, presents a unique challenge in the reconstruction process. In the book of Numbers 19:2-10, God instructed Moses and Aaron to bring an unblemished red heifer for specific rituals. After its slaughter, its ashes, along with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet material, are collected for future purification rituals, symbolizing purity and renewal. These rituals, rooted in ancient religious practices, hold profound symbolic meanings. The red heifer's spotless nature symbolizes purity and serves as a metaphor for cleansing from impurity. Some interpret these rituals as early symbolic representations of Jesus' sacrifice, drawing parallels between the red heifer rituals and Christian beliefs. This interpretation finds resonance in various texts of the New Testament, particularly Hebrews 9:13-14, which compares the red heifer sacrifice to Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. After facing challenges, the Jewish community viewed the arrival of the red heifer as a divine intervention, marking a pivotal moment in their preparations for future reconstruction. Recently, 5 special red heifers arrived in Israel from Texas. These heifers are less than a year old, and they are very important. If they stay completely red without any marks, they can be used to make special ashes. These ashes are needed in Jewish law to clean people who have been near a dead body. This kind of cleaning is super important for the future priests, Kohanim, who will work in the third temple. At first, the heifers stay in quarantine in Haifa for 7 days to make sure they are healthy. Then, they are taken to different places in Israel, with one place open for everyone to see. The heifers will be looked after until they are old enough, which is when they turn 3 years old. A group called B'nai Israel, which includes Jews and Christians, helped find and bring these heifers to Israel. Byron Stinson, a rancher from Texas, took care of the cattle. When the heifers arrived, there was a special event at Ben Gurion Airport, and important people from the Temple Institute and the Jerusalem and Heritage Ministry were there. After the quarantine, the calves were sent to 2 different places in Israel. One place is open to the public, but the other is kept secret. This is done to ensure the heifer's safety. The temple and its rituals are really important to the Jewish people, so they want to make sure nothing bad happens to the heifers. The red heifers will be very well taken care of at the secret places in Israel until they are 3 years old. Then, they will play a big part in the cleaning process. Their remains will be turned into ashes needed for the third temple. Taking care of them so carefully is part of getting ready to rebuild the third temple and make the prophecies come true. Sukot Festival, commemorating the journey. Sukot, a special Jewish festival, was recently celebrated in Israel. It's a time to remember when the Israelites traveled through the desert after leaving Egypt. Also called the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths, Sukot is one of the big 3 festivals in Judaism, along with Passover and Shavuot. During Sukot, there's a significant ritual called the water libation ceremony, or Simchat B'Tashua. This old tradition involves pouring water onto the altar in the temple in Jerusalem. It was a central part of Sukot celebrations during the Second Temple. Back then, during Sukot, there was a big gathering every morning. The priests would go to the Shiloh Spring, also known as the Siloam Spring, outside the walls of Jerusalem. They'd collect water in a special golden flask and bring it back to the temple through the water gate. When the priests got to the water gate, they'd start a happy procession with the sound of a shofar, a ram's horn. They'd be joined by musicians playing different instruments and singing songs of praise. People in the crowd would wave willow branches, adding to the joy. Once inside the temple, the priests would do some symbolic actions. One priest would pour wine from a silver vessel into a bowl on the altar. At the same time, another priest would pour water from the golden flask into another bowl. These bowls were important because small pipes connected them, so the wine and water would flow together into a drain on the side of the altar. This setup was all about combining 2 important elements. While pouring the water and wine, the priests would pray and give blessings. This ritual wasn't just symbolic. It was also a way to ask for rain. This was especially important during Sukot, which happens in autumn when rain is needed for crops to grow well. And this happened. Recently, on October 12th, a special ceremony called the Water Libation Ceremony was brought back to life. Jewish leaders, musicians, and Orthodox Jewish followers joined in, following the ancient rituals carefully. The ceremony, led by priests called Kohanim, wearing special clothes and accompanied by Levites playing music, retraced the steps from Shahar Hashpat in the old city of Jerusalem to Shiloh, also known as Siloam Springs, just like in ancient times. Silver trumpets played at each stop along the way while the crowd sang and danced. Under the supervision of important rabbis, a group carried a golden jug filled with water from the Shiloh Pool. When they reached the mountain summit, they set up a model altar and tools, just like in the old temple. The altar was decorated with big leafy branches like they used to do in ancient times. The ceremony ended with blessings from the priests and a special event called the Hakel ceremony, which only happens once every 7 years. Even though the Torah doesn't mention the water ceremony, people still see it as a happy occasion. In the past, this ceremony lasted for 15 hours in the old temple, and the celebrations would continue all through the night until the next morning when temple services started again. Sukot celebrations attracted people from all over the world, making it a day of worship for everyone. During the last 6 days of Sukot, there was a special water ceremony in the morning. Priests would fill a flask with spring water and go from the temple to the Shiloh Spring at the base of Mount Moriah. Then 2 priests would pour wine and water into special holes on the stone altar in the temple's courtyard for this sacred ceremony. The Shiloh Pool, also known as Shalom in English and Silwan in Arabic, is really important in the Bible. It's expected to be restored when the Third Temple is completed. Pilgrims would traditionally start their journey to Jerusalem at this pool for biblical feasts. After washing in the pool, they would go to the inner court of the Temple Mount to offer sacrifices. The Rise of Antichrist. Today, the world faces many challenges and uncertainties, which some see as the first sign that the Antichrist might be coming. According to the Bible, this figure is supposed to show up during times of confusion and fear, pretending to offer peace and happiness. While many people look to governments and leaders for answers, the Antichrist is believed to offer deceptive solutions, tricking those who trust in human leaders. As believers, it's important to be careful and trust what the Bible teaches instead of relying on human leaders. Pastor Hibbs talks about how the world is becoming more unstable, saying, "The globe is destabilizing on a scale never experienced before." Luke 21:25. Economic problems and stores closing down after COVID-19 add to this instability. The increase in natural disasters is also seen as another sign of the times. According to Jesus in Matthew, these events show that a difficult time is coming. Today, with more earthquakes, famines, and diseases without cures, the signs match what the Bible said would happen. Even though believers in Jesus won't have to go through these events, it's important to recognize them and get ready spiritually for the future. Finally, the idea of wars and rumors of wars also matches what Jesus talked about in Matthew as signs of his return. With conflicts and tensions all over the world, there's a lot of unrest and violence, which could make it easier for the Antichrist to show up. The Bible warns that this person will come during a time of war and offer fake solutions. Christians are told to be careful and not believe empty promises from people who just want power. Pastor Hibbs also mentions Israel's problems with other countries, saying, Israel announced this past week that they will probably be in a full-scale war within a matter of weeks, and saying that peace is really important. The Bible story suggests that the Antichrist might pretend to be a peacemaker during times like these. Even with all the chaos in the world, believers are encouraged to hold on to what the Bible teaches and stay alert. Finding peace and safety in faith is the most important thing, even though the Antichrist might come. Pastor Hibbs says that the coming of the lawless one isn't just a story, but something that the Bible talks about as happening. So believers should trust the Bible and be ready for what's to come. Armageddon. The term Armageddon has a long history linked to many major battles. This place has seen significant conflicts from ancient times to World War I. According to the Bible, Armageddon will be the scene of a final battle between troops from Eastern and Western Eurasia fighting for global control. In this biblical story, the kings of the East, seen by some as Russia and China today, will attack Europe with a huge army of 200 million soldiers. This event, said to wipe out a third of humanity, will happen on the Eurasian continent just before Jesus returns. Another part of this prophecy, found in Daniel 11:44-43, discusses a 10-nation alliance forming in Central Europe. This is expected to happen right before the world-changing events. It describes a conflict between the King of the South and the King of the North, seen as the European community facing threats from the South. Today's world matches some of these prophecies, with tensions in the Middle East and Europe facing challenges from Islamic nations. But amidst all this, Jesus is said to win against these forces, giving believers hope. Revelation 19 gives a big vision of future events. It talks about powerful forces gathering for war against a divine figure on a horse, setting up a huge showdown. Revelation 19:19-21 says that the beast and the false prophet will be captured and thrown into a fiery lake, showing that even though they deceived many, they will face a reckoning. Looking closer at Ezekiel's predictions in chapters 38-39, we see a future where nations, including Russia and China, attack Israel. But the scriptures promise that God will intervene and win, showing that those who start wars will see the true power of God. Isaiah 59:8 says that real peace and strength come from following divine principles, not from having strong weapons. So what do you think of the very last warning from Israel terrifying the whole world? Comment below and subscribe for more.